of conduct. So remember, be aware of others, be welcoming and respectful, be friendly, patient, understanding, be open to all viewpoints, and be considerate of others. So remember, the code of conduct is available on the link on your screen. Donate. So all donations are going to the National Museum of Computing. Sponsors, like these events can't happen without sponsors. I certainly know from the Developer Conference in Western Australia, we could not run an amazing event that we run every year without our amazing sponsors. So again, thank you so much for the amazing sponsors for the UK community event. Don't forget to tweet, get on the Twitters. We'll see you there. Make sure you use the hashtag GDD2021 and @Developer Day. So my name is Ming Johanson. I'll be talking about invisible leadership today. Who I am, so I'm the CEO of a digital marketing agency called Marketing Jumpstart. I'm also a media commentator on mental health, tech and social media. So I'm a mental health ambassador for an Australian non-for-profit that focuses on suicide prevention called Are You OK? I'm also the winner of the Women in Tech Award. And I'm an introvert, and I'm diagnosed with CPTSD and anxiety disorder. And I mention those two things not for anybody to feel sorry for me or anybody to get upset or worried about me. It's really for the people in the room that might see this and need to see a version of themselves. So, where this talk was born was I was having a conversation with a person in a tech function, and she was very frustrated about the fact that they'd been passed over management. They'd been talked down to, they were constantly being dismissed, they felt insignificant, and they didn't feel like they could get any further in their career. So I proposed to them at that time that they were in fact in the strongest position they had ever been in, and that it was a position of power to be underestimated. They looked at me quite confused, and ultimately it was that because she was underestimated, it meant she could observe people in their true nature. So for me, invisibility was actually something that kept me very safe when I was small, when I was quite young. And a lot of people will end up in that space where they're invisible so that they can stay safe as well. Dragons and monsters don't always get vanquished by being loud. So I've made it my job to be a very good observer. I would observe people for their behaviour. There was one time where I was on a flight to Melbourne, and the person who was serving everybody came up to me and asked me if she could sit somebody next to me, and I was like, of course, this is your plane. Why would I be bothered by that? And she sort of was a bit resigned in the fact that nobody else had been okay with that. The way that they had treated her was quite dismissive and quite awful. So again, being able to observe people for their true behaviour because you're underestimated is an opportunity that you can save those notes for later. So this was my journey of leadership. It was not what I thought it was. I thought it was this straight line that would just go up and continuous. Instead, there were actually some moments where I went backwards in leadership. In fact, I used to work for a telecommunications company, and in that role, I got turned down for leadership. And so, as one would expect, I started to send rebellious emails. And they were not helpful, and I was very childish in the way that I handled that. But really what had happened was I'd been told that I wasn't good enough for management because I was too bubbly. Now, if I was a man, or if I, was somebody that wasn't, that sort of way, what would I have been called? And it might have been the words charismatic instead of bubbly. So why would I'd be turned down for such a role. And really what I'd done was I'd put it in this stupid box and was like, that's such a stupid thing for somebody to say to me. Eventually what would happen is the leader that was in charge of me pulled me aside and asked me how I could have better handled that. And what I learned that day was a really valuable lesson, that it wasn't so much about me not getting the role, but it was how I showed up in that environment. So now I run a business where I employ 6 people across Australia, and leadership is definitely not a straight line. It's a fine line between stupidity and fearlessness. And I've spent a lot of time sometimes feeling quite alone because I'm doing things that are not the norm. This past 21 months living in a pandemic has meant that I've made decisions to employ people instead of dismissing people. And a lot of people were like, you're crazy, what are you doing? That's madness. So what I had to do was also start surrounding myself with people that would support me in that journey. Humans don't just fear failure, and I used to say quite a lot that I was firm friends with failure. Failure was something that I was very familiar with, but it was success that was actually really terrifying for me. And so I would create lots of strategies to avoid success because it was quite scary. And I also thought that in order to be successful, I had to be this person that was very loud and extroverted, which is not how I am. Invisible leadership often leads to an era of firsts. So for me, I came from an environment of violence. I came from an environment with low socioeconomic background. And so for me, there were very few people in my circle or in my environment that were role models. That forced me to step up into a position of being that role model. What would that look like? You know, there's a saying that we have in Women in Tech, which is, if you can see her, you can be her. But I often ask, what if you don't? What if you don't see her? There's an opportunity to be that person. There's an opportunity to step up, and you don't have to be loud and proud. You can be the invisible person. The other thing is, I think I've had lots of conversations with people about them having to have some sort of origin story, or this dark night story, and the reality is you don't. You don't have to suffer in order to be an invisible leader, just a good observer. So, how to be an invisible leader? And this is what I'm looking for when I'm looking to hire people, to nurture people, to grow people. Like a good cup of tea and a tea bag, I am looking for people who are good at adapting to make a good tea in hot water. So how you show up in tough environments for yourself and for others counts for a lot. This was something that was very difficult for me to learn. Coming from a mental health background where I'm really challenged in my own mental health, I would often fill from an empty cup, and then I would burn out, and then I wasn't any help to anyone. And so I will often say now to my leaders in my business, make sure you're filling from a full cup, not an empty one. So self-care is really paramount when it comes to this. I love pockets in dresses. I love them. I don't think there's many people that don't love them. And I think the thing is about having hidden pockets is they're useful and awesome. They can carry so much. And the same with people is people are complex and there's so much more than what's on the surface. So being useful and being awesome in your community and leading from the front and supporting those and nurturing those conversations is a great way forward. A reminder, there is a seat at a table for everyone. Leadership doesn't have to be limited to the loud. This seat is for you. It's not for anyone else. It's for you alone. Remember that you are unique. You don't have to be anybody else. You don't have to be anybody else's journey. Ultimately, you just have to sit there. And if you don't sit in this seat, nobody else is going to. I have run deeply under time, but I hope that you enjoyed my talk. I'll jump into the Discord channel for anybody that has any questions. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I hope you have an amazing developer day, guys. Connect with me on these platforms. I'm Ming Johanson, and that's me.